a little bit different on our chat with Matt today. We've got Mr. Ward, one of our mentor colleagues. Mark, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Nice to be with you, Matt. Look forward to this for a while now.
Oh yeah,
and so,
okay, well,
let's make it happen.
Let's have a bit of fun with this one then, shall we? So I've known
it.
you for quite a while now. I also know you've been in a sales role for nearly 2.5 decades. I'm sorry to have to call that out on this recording, but it's true. So it got me thinking, because I've also been in sales for a similar amount of time that you have. And my first question is going to be a bit different today to what I normally ask, in that if you could go back to 1996,
yes,
based on everything that you've learned over the last nearly 2.5 decades, could talk to your new into sales self, what advice would you give them? Or what advice would you give you, should I say?
Yeah, what would I tell myself?
Yeah.
Well, I worked with somebody a while ago. When I was a young guy, I was trying really, really hard to break it into the big league. And I used to have somebody come up to me and feel the side of my head and go, "Mark, don't worry about it. You are going to develop gray hairs at some point. And when you develop gray hairs, you'll be taken more seriously in this business." And so, to your earlier point, I've certainly developed, I've got the gray hairs and I've got the experience. And if I were to go back to my young self, I would probably say that you're in the right environment, because sales as a discipline, sales as an industry is forever growing, and it's forever changing, and it's forever relevant. And Matt, you and I both share a colleague in common, and he has a particular saying. He says, in the sales game, it's a pretty safe place to hedge your bets and to put anchors into the ground, because CEOs and leaders will always cut a check to improve sales. It's that mission critical. And so I think that the investment in sales as a discipline, as a practice, as a career path is a good one.
And it's a great answer. I have to tell you as listeners and readers that when we were talking about this before we started today, Mark's answer was a little bit different from that. He said, look, I'd study harder and I'd become a doctor. So why not? Why not? I think, again, if I went back, once you get into sales, I think, Mark, you kind of stay here. Would that be fair to say?
That's quite right. And, when I did say that I'd become a doctor, my fear of flowing blood was always going to prevent that, Matt. So here we are. That
might not have been a good path for you, that's for sure. That's for sure. So let's talk a little bit. So let's keep with the theme of sales.
Sure.
In our organisation, we focus on sales productivity. One thing that you're a subject matter expert in is something called a sales blueprint. Now, I know what that is, but just explain it in simple terms to our listeners and our viewers.
Yeah, so when we talk about a sales blueprint, we talk about an operating model or an operating system for how you manage opportunities, or how a company manages opportunities end to end. And I think of the blueprint more as a process, an integration process. So when we as a business get mandated or tasked with developing a blueprint for an organization, I think of it as an integration exercise where I take a look at the entire sales system. And I, together with the client, in a kind of a co-creation type process, I would look at who are the contributors to the sales engine from a functional point of view, different roles, etc. And I would look at how we integrate those different roles, that workflow across all of those different teams and departments into one version of the truth, so that we can begin to pursue operational rigor and process discipline with some level of success. And so if you said to me, and I'll kind of preempt your question, where does one begin with a blueprint? You begin with how the client buys, how the customer buys. So you'd look at their buying preferences, you'd look at their rhythms, the decision gates, etc. And then you would calibrate how you sell against that. To not do that wouldn't make any sense. In other words, we've encountered a lot of different companies that they like to sell. They like to sell the way they like to sell, and they've got an idea as to what works and what doesn't, and they can hold quite rigidly to that. And yet when you interrogate, is it aligned with how the customer likes to buy, they come quite unstuck with that question. And so what we would say is, let's look at how the customer buys, let's calibrate and align our entire sales engine around how the customer buys, and then get everything working accordingly. So that's probably as short an answer as I can muster.
So I've often heard from a number of sources actually that aren't the very best salespeople those that don't follow process at all?
Yeah,
What's your thoughts?
What a great question. So a couple of years ago, I got a really big mandate in a company that I ran in South Africa, and we were tasked with finding what my client called the beasts, and he wanted the best rainmakers on the continent of Africa. As you can tell, my accent is from South Africa, so I hail from Africa, and he wanted these beasts. And these were individuals that were going to carry personal sales targets of 500 million US dollars and up. So some really, really senior people. 18 months later, we had recruited a number of beasts. And I remember looking at the shortlist of these candidates before we went on this recruitment process. And it dawned on me that they had very little in common. There was no template. There was no prototype, if you will, of an incredible salesperson. They differed in terms of their background. To use the word that's floating about a lot now, they were just incredibly diverse, as individuals. And so I learned way back then that there's, it's very difficult to say, well, a phenomenal salesperson needs to look like this or behave like that or have the following attributes or personality or character traits or whatever. It just doesn't work like that. So, yeah.
But does that not, take away the whole argument, the whole need for a sales operating system then?
Well, I think that no, it doesn't, because if there's one thing we've learned as a business is that we get the most impact in terms of a sales transformation. We get the most impact from actually achieving some kind of operational rigor, process discipline, the single version of the truth, where everybody is following similar processes, and you can get a sales engine to be properly integrated and aligned in the different role players. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't make allowances for individuals to express themselves creatively in how they sell. But a sales operating blueprint is not a sales methodology. You can't confuse the two. It's not a set of sales tactics. The blueprint is an operating model of how you manage opportunities end to end and how the different role players would contribute to it. And so in my mind, that's quite distinctive, or distinct, should I say, from a sales methodology or a set of sales tactics.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I'd add to that is where it's quite different is, where you have got individuals who like to work in their own way. The point you made earlier is it's not about me, it's about the customer. It's always about the customer. Yeah. And therefore what I've got to do is yes, operate in my way, but to the best fit of the customer.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. And so where I've seen the blueprint add the most value, in fact, it might be useful to talk about one that we're busy with right now. And I looked at it this morning, and it's probably on version 6 or 7. And typically what we would do is we would say to the client, well, give us your operating blueprint as it looks today. And some of them say, well, we don't have one. But you actually do. Every sales engine does have one, whether it's documented and written down or not. It exists. There's a way that they're achieving the results, or lack thereof, that they're getting to. And so you help them document it. You help them create the different sales stages, align it to how they think the customer buys, and then you map onto a sales methodology and a set of tools, etc., that they would currently use. And then what that does is it reveals huge gaps. And the blueprint that I looked at this morning, it's so evident if you see it, that when marketing hands over to sales and they call an opportunity, it goes into stage 1 opportunity, that company does very, very little in that first important stage in order to grow the value of that opportunity. They take it from marketing and they basically process it the way an administrator would process it. And so what they are asking us is, they say, well, help us increase deal value. And if you look at the blueprint, it's immediately evident why they're struggling with deal value, because when marketing gives them that opportunity, it's a fully qualified, very strong lead. They are putting that into the opportunity management process and doing in fact, doing nothing at all to grow that opportunity value and to increase the value in the customer's eyes. So So the point I'm making is that when you design the blueprint, it shows you the current state. It identifies specific gaps in terms of, how you can optimize your sales engine and where you need to improve it. And then you can begin to co-create those solutions with the client. And that always works. And again, it's quite distinctive from a sales methodology or a set of sales tactics. It's much more around the operational side.
Okay, so I've got two final questions for you. I'm conscious of time.
Go for it.
The first one is, in your best 24 years of sales experience language, tell me, just summarize the benefits of a sales operating system or a blueprint.
Sales operating system integrates the different components, the different parts of the sales engine, integrates them, aligns them, and gets them all working together. One version of the truth, so that you can achieve some semblance of operational rigor and process discipline. Otherwise, you've got a sales engine that's not aligned, where there's all kinds of process disparities that hurt efficiency.
Great.
Maybe my answer. Yeah.
Perfect. And my final question, let's go back to where we started actually. If we could take one lesson from your 24 years of selling, and we can impart that lesson to someone who's maybe new into sales or needs a bit of a foot up in sales at the moment, just one lesson, Mark, what would it be?
I would learn to think of sales as a system. And when I talk about a system, when I started in sales, I very much thought it was all about me carrying a bag, running after a target, and making my number. But the sales discipline is much more than that. And I would learn it from a very young age. I would learn to see it as a system. I would learn to identify the different role players and the different components in that system, and start to think about what integrates them, what makes them work well. And then, of course, to see your own sales engine that you're working with, and see the customer's buying process and their buying engine as an additional system. And if those two don't speak to each other in the right sort of language and with the right etiquette and decorum and all of that stuff, you've got a problem. And so my advice would be to think of what you're doing from a systemic point of view. That'd be
So I think it's a good way to finish this, in that if we think about, as salespeople, we've got to be in step, perfect alignment with our buyer. If we're out of step, if we're not following their rhythm, it's going to impact the customer experience and our chances of success or otherwise. Fair to say, Mark?
Right. Yeah, quite right. And if you just give me another quick second, Matt, we've spoken about this idea of strategic advisor a lot, and most people understand it, but I think that there's still so much to be said about showing up in a relationship with a client as a true strategic partner and adding value from a business point of view, a broader commercial point of view. And I think young salespeople, they wear their agenda of making their number on their sleeve, and they don't look at the client's business and think broadly about the business problems. They too narrowly focus on what they're doing. And I've learned that the sooner that you can look at a client's business as a business, and to start to see the full extent of the commercial challenges that they face, the sooner you can earn your way into that into that designation of trusted partner or strategic advisors. That would be the one other thing.
So I think for all of you listening and watching this today, there's a handful of things in there that would help you, in your professional selling endeavors. So Mark, I really appreciate you taking your time out.
You're welcome.
And doing that. If you can take one or two things out, as usual, just do one thing. Don't do two, don't do three, just do one. And if it helps you in your sales career, then this time you spent with us today has been really good. Mark, thank you. We appreciate you taking the time out.
You're welcome.
Those of you listening and watching, thank you for taking the time out. We'll see you again very soon on another chat with Matt. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Cheers. Bye.